Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. My name is Tasneem Idris, and I am the editorial associate of the Islam and Liberty Network. Welcome to the Islam and Liberty Network talk show, which is a free space to discuss different developments in Muslim majority countries and beyond, in the hope of promoting a Muslim case for freedom. This is our very first episode of the ILN Talk Show, and we're going to be discussing, how Muslim organizations should manage their PR. We're very happy to be joined by Mr. Muddassar Ahmed, who is the managing partner of Unitas Communications, which is a British PR consultancy where he leads projects for the UN, the US State Department, among others. And he is also the founder of the Concordia Forum, an annual retreat for senior leaders from politics, media, and the corporate world. It's also worth mentioning that he was listed by Georgetown University as amongst the 500 most influential Muslims globally. Mr. Muddassar, very happy to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So before we start discussing our topic, I'm sure everyone is interested to learn about the Concordia Forum and what kind of people should seek to attend.
The Concordia Forum is essentially a manifestation of a very Western Muslim way of looking at themselves as a minority in the West, but also with respect to their values and how they seek to project them more broadly. And that takes the form essentially of one annual retreat plus a number of other events throughout the year. The retreats are non-sectarian, they're very inclusive. They're, in a sense, secular by nature in the sense that they're not religious retreats. You know, they're retreats for people to come together, bond, talk about religion, politics, and all those sorts of issues. And they're very gender equal. And they seek to essentially find a way to bring together this very broad spectrum of Muslims that inhabit and call the West their home.
Perfect. So you are a PR specialist, which means that you have spotted a need in that area and you wanted to make a difference in it. So tell us a bit more about how you came to specialize in public relations.
I started my early career in radio, and I used to have a radio station. I used to volunteer as a radio presenter for a very long time. And then I started doing community television. And I was always fascinated by, because I was so exposed to the media and news narratives, I was always fascinated by how these narratives enter the news in the first place, and the role that organizations and individuals play in spinning, or if you like, in portraying this news. I was very fascinated by that, and I was particularly fascinated by how that narrative affected my community in the West, in how it was perceived, in how narratives were spun in the media. So I had this interest in this area for a long time, and I decided about 12 years ago that there wasn't a PR agency that understood the Muslim world well enough to be able to, I was very lofty at the time, I know, but very ambitious, but understood the Muslim world well enough to be able to portray its views in the global media space. And this was the aim 12 years ago, and that's how I fell into it. And I decided that with my background in media and my somewhat background in politics, I was probably one of the right people to try to do this.
And that was specifically in the UK. You started there.
Yeah, it was in the UK, but very quickly we expanded into the US, and we're active across the world now, seeking to help voices, initiatives, and governments from the Islamic world be more articulate to those in the Western world, and vice versa.
Perfect. So there's this very common idea that Muslim organizations are all about charity work, philanthropy, and the like. So is it really true? Like, is it only limited to charity work? And how would you define Muslim organizations?
Oh, wow. Defining Muslim organizations. Well, So I can only look at it from a Western perspective. Since Muslims are involved in everything by extension that they do, has an imprint of their faith. Now, whether you would define it as a Muslim organization or not, I think, look, there are people that are inspired by their faith to do charitable work, so they set up organizations that, help everyone, they help the broad society. There are organizations that specifically help Muslims. Maybe those would be Muslim organizations, ones that are specifically set up for the community for themselves. I think that's how I would define it, So if a charity that only helps Muslims is a Muslim organization, But of course, there are organizations led by Muslims that help everyone and are part of the broader landscape.
So you wouldn't say that it's only charity work, because a lot of people are saying that the Muslim majority, Muslim organizations are not really providing academia with substantial academic work like the other non-Muslim organizations. So what do you think about that?
Well, so I think this is very complicated because as a Muslim in the West, I see the impact of Muslim academics on all aspects of academic life. We have from professors of psychology to medicine to whatever. So I kind of reject that argument. But if I look at the Muslim world, I think there is an issue, right? There are, I think they're beginning to catch up with knowledge production. If you look at the level of PhDs that are coming out of the Islamic world, they're abysmally low. But also that doesn't do justice to the fact that a lot of Muslims actually go to the West to get their PhD. So it's a bit confusing picture. But the fact that they go to the West means that there aren't enough reputable institutes of higher education in the Islamic world, Muslim world, and that remains an issue for the Muslim world to resolve.
Absolutely. So in the age of social media, where everyone can say basically anything they want about everyone, do you think that Muslim organizations control the outside narrative about them? Are they sufficiently publicizing, their achievements and speaking about themselves in public, or they don't really care about how they're portrayed and they just concentrate on the work on the ground?
I think that whatever their intention is, they are sending out public statements, whether they like it or not. The act of not engaging in the public space is a public statement. The act of engaging in the public space and how you engage and what level you engage and whether, is also a public statement. And I think that when it comes to the Islamic world, there is a big confusion about professional public relations. I think there is this feeling amongst founders and CEOs that they're able to do it all themselves and that they are the best judge of their presence in the public space. And often that's right, often that's right, but it has to be, in my view, always accompanied by professional public affairs officers who understand how to position that narrative in a professional way that makes sense. So I think that when we're talking about the Islamic world, there are so many different organizations doing incredible work, yet are not able to get that work recognized, are not able to get into the newspapers, are not able to get into the right medium. And sadly, the work in this hyper-competitive world where everybody wants to be recognized for what they do, some of their good work is not being as well recognized as it should be.
Is it because of some lack of coordination between Muslim, Islamic organizations, or probably even, coordination between non-Muslim organizations and Muslim organizations?
I think it's because of a lack of expertise and lack of investment in knowing how to push the narrative out. I don't think coordination is often when you get, too many cooks spoil the broth. So often trying to coordinate messaging amongst a broad group of organizations isn't necessarily the right way. I think what you need is the ability to invest in your own personal public relations, hire the right people, understand how it works, train more people in how to do this, establish the networks, the colleges, the professional qualifications needed to make this happen, but also recognize that it is a separate discipline, just like accounting, just like lawyers, just like any other medicine. This is separate discipline that requires separate investment, and we just don't do that.
Do you think, because some people would argue that there are common grounds, there are common purposes. So it's not really about working separately. It's not either about competition, but about coordination and working together. So, of course, there are some different issues, different purposes, but sometimes we meet in the middle. So should we aim for that as different Muslim organizations, throughout the world?
This is it depends on the context, So I can't speak to that. I mean, I think it really depends on what you're trying to achieve.
Let me give you an example. So, for example, in Ramadan, out of a sudden, we just have many Muslim organizations, charitable ones. They just all about giving charity and making ads about it and showing how generous they are. And sometimes problems happen because some two Muslim organizations would target the same community, and then it's all about publicity and stuff. So isn't it better to coordinate because we have the same aim?
Yeah, it might be better, but I think it's impossible. I think as long as there's a human ego, and as long as there are factions, and as long as there are people, you are never going to be able to get one community to completely coordinate their charitable giving. It's just not going to happen. You have, even in countries where this system is centralized, it's difficult, unless you get the state involved. And that's an entirely different conversation, whether you should get the state involved or not, right? But trying to get different charities to coordinate their activities, I think is going to be tough.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, at the same time, you do find that charities will do coordinate when it comes to actually dispersing the funds. So a lot of, I know here in the UK, we have the Disaster Emergencies Committee who come together once in a while to coordinate when there's a big disaster. I think you can get short-term coordination on humanitarian affairs, but to get a permanent kind of coordination is difficult. Desirable, but difficult.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think about Muslim organizations who criticize other Muslim organizations because they are communicating with non-Muslim organizations, even though the purposes and the work they're doing is fantastic and it's not really wrong with our Islamic values?
Well, I think that engagement and speaking to people that you disagree with is at the core of the Islamic belief system. I believe that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was instructed by God multiple times to engage with people that he disagreed with, and to keep engaging with them even though they attacked him. So I think that if we were to derive our principles from that very basic, simple instruction, I think it's incumbent upon us as a people to do as much engagement as we can. So I think there is insecurity that drives the lack of engagement. And I think there is not just insecurity, but I think that there are lots of misconceptions that also drive that. So I hope that as a community, we can become more engagement focused over time.
This makes me think of, the vocabulary that Muslim organizations tend to use. For example, some of them always make sure to use the word Allah instead of God to make sure that they differentiate themselves from, the Christians or any other. So do you think it's wise to say that? Isn't it better to use the word God in order to, make sure, that we have common things together and, emphasize the similarities between us?
Yeah, this is a difficult one. It depends on who your audience is. I think if your audience is Muslims, then yes, of course, use the word Allah, because people will fundamentally, communication is about being understood, right? So whatever works towards being better understood, I would go with that terminology.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. So we were talking about training earlier and how some people are not really trained for PR and they don't know how to communicate well. So do you think that Muslims are not really investing enough to train? I wouldn't say, the common workers. I'm talking about the leadership, their seniors, on media and public relations. You're not really doing that?
Yeah, I don't see long-term investment in that, I do a lot of business in the Muslim world, and the budgets for PR are very, very low. Staff are regularly not recruited for this purpose, and often are, treated very badly. I think that the generally we need to do a lot more to increase the flow of investment in this area in the Islamic world. In the West, Muslims are doing better, I think, at this. Many of us are professional communicators, are able to understand social media, the general media and other platforms. But I think in the Muslim world, we have a long way to go. Certain countries are doing better than others, but still there's a long way to go.
And is there a communication between Muslim Islamic organizations in the West to help their counterparts in the Muslim world, especially in this area?
Sadly, no. I wish there was. Actually, it's a good idea. I think there are lots of conversations happening, all the time, but there's not a formal, mechanism or a network that enables these, a network of public affairs and public relations practitioners, not that I'm aware of,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Maybe we should work about that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so there's this idea about, leadership and senior people in Muslim organizations are chosen based on their piety and not necessarily on their effectiveness. What do you think about that? And is this really widespread?
Well, piety is so difficult to judge, right? So I don't know. I genuinely don't know. And I definitely don't make decisions based on people's piety,
Like, for example, this person is chosen because he's a good person, he's a good neighbor, he's a good, teacher, and he's not necessarily qualified to, hold that position in this organization, but still we're convinced because he's a good person. And then, there's a lot of mistakes that happen because of that. Yeah.
Well, I'm not in favor of that method of choosing leaders.
Is it, is it widespread? At least in the Muslim world, I can tell you, sadly, that this is the case.
Yeah, maybe in the Muslim world, but I think less I think it was the case in the West, increasingly, that people, because they were older, because they had set up the mosque, they should be the chairman of the mosque, not because they're the best person to do the job. But I think it's changing here, for sure. It's changing. I'm finding more and more people being chosen on merit, and that has to be the gold standard, really. The gold standard has to be people need to be chosen to do jobs on merit, and it's when they're not chosen to do jobs on merit that institutions are weak, societies are weak, civil society is weak, and frustration gets built in, which leads to radical change, which is obviously worse than gradual change always.
Mm-hmm. So how would you define merit? Like, how would you call a person qualified to hold such or such position? I know it depends on the context, but generally, who are the people who are most qualified to be leaders in in Islamic organizations, whether in the West or in the Muslim country, in the Muslim world?
So I think I think it does depend on the nature of the organization. Obviously, if it is a religious services organization, then someone needs to have some sort of qualification in religious services. If it's not a religious services organization and a social organization, then I would look at qualifications and experience, passion. I think passion is very important. If you're not passionate about a particular role, then you're going to do a very bad job, particularly if it's a voluntary role. So yeah, I would employ normal HR practices, but I would also look at things like passion for the community, passion for the role, and track record.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that people choose to volunteer or lead Muslim organizations because they're looking after, social status or prestige or the like?
That I think this happens a lot, of course. And, I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing, because everybody has a piece of that in them, nobody's perfect. We're all humans. We're all seeking relevance and social stature. And, so long as it's not out of control, I think that it's healthy to have a little bit of that inside you as you're seeking to represent your community and its interests.
Mm-hmm. So they would implement that positively and use that to make a difference, not to just
Yes, exactly.
for the status. Absolutely. Do you think that Muslim, non-Muslim organizations are seeing Muslim organizations positively, or they try to stay away from them, especially when it comes to coordination? Let's talk about the West for now.
Okay. So in the West, I think increasingly Muslim organizations are playing a mainstream role. It's happening more and more every single day. I see it, and I think that the fact is that we are influential members of the community. We have, as a community, we have influential roles in the UK and in the US, for instance. Muslims are increasingly seen as part of the mainstream. Their solutions are increasingly adopted. They are breaking new barriers and entering new partnerships with mainstream organizations all the time. In fact, they are being seen as the mainstream. Like it's, this idea that we're not the mainstream often is in our minds. When we start behaving and acting like we're the mainstream, then that has a huge impact. And I think that's beginning to happen.
Great. Do you think this is because the brain drain thing, and a lot of people from the Muslim majority countries choose to live in the West because there are many different opportunities there and better opportunities. So the best of Muslims are in the West, and then their leaders and their seniors in Muslim major in other organizations in the West. Is this the reason why this is happening?
Is this the reason why the Muslim world is losing a lot of talent? Yeah, I think it is. I think the brain drain is a huge part of it. Now, the trouble is that it's very difficult to reverse that unless you can create opportunities in home countries that will compensate to that same degree. This is going to take many, many generations and years to resolve. But yes, you're definitely right. There is a big problem with the brain drain.
Are these people who chose to live in the West sometimes choose to go back to their home countries and try to benefit the others from their expertise and experiences, or at least they don't choose to go back, definitely, but at least they still have ties with their families and their organizations back home, or they just choose to just benefit the West from that?
I think actually a lot of people that move out and work in the West give back a lot to their home countries, by remittances, obviously, by sending money, but also I think emotionally by trying to invest in organizations to help people, by giving development funds, by inspiring people, by trying to set up businesses. I know many people that have, gone from the UK and moved back to, say, Pakistan, set up businesses in IT or in interesting areas to help benefit their country. So it's I think that there's a lot of that goes on that people don't recognize, but of course there's others that don't. It depends.
So for you, PR is not only about bombarding social media with a lot of activities, because this is how we see it here in the Muslim world. Unfortunately, it's about setting up businesses. It's about coordination. It's about the real world, and then probably documents it in social media. But it's not only about social media.
No, PR. This is the misconception. PR is a lot more than social media. It's about understanding. It's about research. There's a huge element of research, understanding and getting the right information and intelligence to be able to say and do the right things. It's about everything from training yourself on how to speak in the media, to crafting messaging, to placing messaging, to where to place the messaging. It's about how to do the right events, how to do the right stakeholder engagement, the right message to give people. It's far more sophisticated than just bombarding social media. And of course, it's very important when it comes to international state arbitration as well. Understanding how, when you're in a big dispute, a legal dispute, understanding how to put your case across is worth, a lot, and is very, very valuable.
Mhm. But there is this conception that some Muslim Islamic organizations in the West are backed by leaders from the Muslim world, and there's a lot of interference between politics and social work and charity work, and that's why some Muslims choose to not to help or volunteer, not even to interfere in these things. To what extent is this correct, and what do you advise people to do?
Yeah, um I think that it was correct 15, 20 years ago, but I think increasingly now, Western Muslims are charting their own destiny. They're not pawns of anyone in a big strategic game. They don't want to be controlled in that sense. And there are major powers in the Islamic world that want to instrumentalize Western Muslims for their foreign policy objectives. And I don't like that, and I resist that personally. I think many others do too. Of course, whilst we have a natural affinity with the Muslim people, government objectives vary from government to government, and politically driven objectives are not one that Western Muslims are here to serve, I think. And I think it's increasingly, thankfully, it's becoming less and less normal.
Yeah, and it's also, I think it's fair to say that Muslim people in the West are also citizens of Western countries, and they have every right to serve their communities there, and they're not really part of the Muslim world in that sense. They can help, but not to the extent to help with politics. Do you
That's
think this is correct?
exactly, yeah, I completely agree with you. Yeah, absolutely. We are not here to serve the interests of Muslim countries. We are here to serve the interests of our countries and ourselves. And I think fundamentally that is what is increasingly happening. Yeah.
Great, great. Um, if you were to advise young Muslims around the world, whether in the Muslim countries or Western countries, about who are aspiring to become like you, who see you as an example to follow, what advice can you share?
Um, I think that, look, the social media revolution now means that people have the ability to be able to put articulate opinions across for everyone to hear, without being restricted by the natural restrictions that might have taken place to freedom of speech in such countries.
In some countries, there are some these restrictions are still there, even
Yeah.
in the web. Yeah.
Yeah, there are. You're right, but still, there's a lot more freer now than it has been before.
Absolutely.
So I think that they should obviously use that as an opportunity to get their voices out. And also, I think that putting effort into production, whether that be media production or literature production or documentary production, always gets noticed. Like actually being, having a certain amount of pride in your work and creating, productions and ideas and putting things out, it always gets noticed. So I think I would encourage them to put that out. Obviously, I think there is a huge market to create public affairs and public relations companies in the Middle East, and in the Islamic world. I think this is a hugely undertapped market. So I would encourage those that are active in this area to think about forming companies, and I'm happy to talk to people privately about how to do that and advise people on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned the Middle East and how this field is not really touched upon, but I would argue. I mean, I completely agree, but it's bombarded by many irrelevant activities, and these people need guidance and they need training. So, can you advise them about what to do and where to go in order to get some skills and understand how to use this? Because, for example, I know it's trivial, but some people think PR is about the number of followers you have on Twitter
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
views you have on a video you post, which has nothing to do with knowledge or charity work or anything. So how can we change this misconception?
That's going to take a long time. It's going to take a long time. So there's not. I wish, ultimately, um, the quality of your engagements and the quality of your followers and the quality of your output matters a lot more in the long run than your ability to be able to get lots of followers and likes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that slowly but surely, this is beginning to spread. But I do think you need more professional. I don't even know if a lot of the public relations practitioners in these countries are chartered. Whether you
Yeah.
have a chartered school of public relations, whether you have professional qualifications or guilds, or how the quality of your training is. I've done some trainings in Turkey and Saudi Arabia and other places, but it just astounds me how some of the basic tools of messaging, writing, strategic communications planning are missing. So when you don't do the theoretical work behind this effort, then your practical outcomes are lacking in quality, and that's what's happening here. People are not studying their audience; they're not understanding, the shifting dynamics of an increasingly educated audience, and they don't seem to, and I think they don't seem to understand the importance of having strategic communications plans, of message testing, of focus groups, of all of that stuff. There's so much to learn.
Absolutely. I think some people would argue and tell that this is correct, but the audience is so in want of trivial things that this is the only thing we can offer. Like nowadays, anything can go viral, and you can see like a very trivial video, but very insignificant thing gets the entire attention of an entire country. And on the other hand, there is like I know some organizations who have many great work, substantial work. Their website would be filled with interesting articles and webinars, but it's not really very well displayed to the audience. So because people don't really read articles nowadays, and they don't know what to do to expose it to the public. So we have these two different things. So how can we address this problem?
I think I should start charging now for just kidding. No, I think look, this is the age-old problem. This is why there is a whole industry. Yeah. This is why when you look at the World Economic Forum and its PR, and you look at the Skoll Foundation, or you look at the Atlantic Council, or you look at the German, they have very, very good PR, right? Like they don't have this problem. They're able to get their thought leadership, their articles, and their very dense events looked at by loads of people. Yeah. Whereas those in the Muslim world struggle. I was just speaking about think tanks in the Islamic world earlier on today with some people, and we were looking at the landscape, and there's very few of note, but there's a reason for that, right? And I think that it's not that difficult, frankly, to actually make that leap. They need to spend the money and hire good people to advise them and be patient. These things take 2 or 3 years to happen. But there's nothing I can tell right now as to what they should do, but I'm on their side, and I really wish that they do get their stuff out. You're right about trivial things getting viral, but that's everywhere. I mean, that's just, there's a market for that, and you have to know your market as a think tank or whatever it is that you are, and just engage with it better. And I'm really enjoying what you guys are doing with these conversations and the work that you guys have done.
Thank you.
So, you're certainly going in the right direction.
Thanks so much, and thanks for the collaboration. So, anything to add? Anything you would like to add before we close?
No, this has been very, very enjoyable. It's sometimes I feel like talking about PR in the Muslim world, there's such a big disconnect between the professional practices of PR and what happens in the Muslim world that it can be quite confusing for people. So I hope that it's been helpful. Certainly we're seeing it took a very long time for professional marketing and advertising to get situated in the Muslim world, and it happened, right? Mm-hmm. So now you do have professional advertising agencies and marketing agencies, and I think PR will get there too. Public affairs and public relations will catch up, and it will happen, and I'm excited to see how that unfolds.
Thank you so much, Mr. Muddassar Ahmed, for being with us and for your collaboration, and looking forward to collaborating with you again and with other Concordia Forum figures. Likewise. Thank you. Goodbye. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.